Morning everybody. Croeso I sesiwn ginio dysgu a gan hailia gan raglen gwasanaethau ymsodiadau rhywiol Cymru. Welcome everyone to the Welsh Sexual Assaults Lunch and Learn session. I think many of you have attended our sessions before. I'm Jo Williams. I'm the Programme Director for Welsh Sexual Assault Services. And today we have a session that's going to be run jointly between the CSA and Barnardo's. And I'm not sure who is going to start, because I know we've got a couple of representatives today. But I will pass you over now to the team to take you through this afternoon's session. So thank you all.
Thanks, Joanna. So I'm Lisa McCrindle, Prunandar. Thanks very much for having us this afternoon, and it's amazing to see so many people joining this call. I am definitely going to be checking in with the team that set this up about how they do this promotion, because it's epic and brilliant that so many of you are prioritising coming to sessions to think about child sexual abuse. So thank you very much for giving up your lunchtime or part of your afternoon. I'm Lisa McCrindle. I'm Assistant Director for Policy and Communications at the Centre of Expertise on Child Sexual Abuse. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about us, and then I get the pleasure of introducing my fabulous colleagues, Kairika and Nikki, who are going to talk you through some of our research and our materials that hopefully will help you have a better understanding of child sexual abuse, but also some knowledge about some of the resources that we prepare to help you in your work. It would be great to hear some reflections from yourself. There will be some questions that we'll pose to you to have a little bit of a think about during this session, but we're really conscious that we've not got loads of time. So we'll give you those questions to maybe have a bit of a think about. We're really open to you feeding back, giving us thoughts and challenge afterwards, because that's how we get better at making sure that our resources are best matched to the needs of people like yourselves on the ground and working with colleagues in terms of identifying and responding to child sexual abuse. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the CSA Centre, but can I get just a general hands up around how many of you are aware of the CSA Centre? How many of you have heard of us before? Have any of you seen us present before? Trying to see those hands up. So it's a few going up. Everybody's trying to find the hands up thing. That's what I'm usually doing at this point, which is great. Brilliant. It's great to see that some of you have heard of us, but also great to have hopefully some people here that haven't come across us before, and we can tell you about the work that we're doing. So the Centre of Expertise on Child Sexual Abuse, we are an independent centre. We are hosted by Barnardo's, but we operate independently of Barnardo's. We were set up by the Home Office in 2017. That's fine. People noting that they're going to be leaving early, that's absolutely fine. I just spotted that this is being recorded, so I'm guessing it's going to be shared somewhere afterwards, so you can catch up with any bits that you missed. We were set up in 2017 really to look at how do we provide better understanding and support to professionals around child sexual abuse, so that we can improve the identification and response to child sexual abuse, make children safer, and make sure that they're better supported when it does happen. So as I said, we're funded by the Home Office and hosted by Barnardo's, but we work really, really closely in partnership with a whole range of different institutions. We are constantly seeking to get networked in. If you work for any organisations and you think, hang on, they don't seem to be talking to the CSA Centre, let us know, and we'll definitely look to make those relationships, because our objective is how do we best help professionals working on the ground to be able to more confidently respond to and identify child sexual abuse. So we do that through kind of a number of different ways. We have a multidisciplinary team made up of our research team, which Kairika is a member of, who undertake research, evidence development to better inform and better help us to better understand child sexual abuse, various responses to it. What do we know about the scale of it? What do we know about what works in terms of responding to it? What do we need to look at more of? Our practice team, which Nikki is a part of, which so we have a range of practitioners from all different sectors, so from social work, from teaching, from multi-agency working, from policing, who are all bringing that expertise from their practice into the work that we're doing, so that we can best tailor our resources to meet the needs of professionals. And then I lead up our policy and communications team, so we're looking at how do we take all of that knowledge and learning and help to influence the policies that may be made at national, at regional and at local levels, again to best support better practice. And we do that through a range of different routes. And then part of our thinking about how do we talk about child sexual abuse. So we do it all the time at the CSA Centre. We're constantly talking about child sexual abuse, but we recognise that that's something quite difficult for people to talk about. So how do we best help people to think about how they're going to feel more comfortable thinking about and talking about child sexual abuse? So the presentation that we're going to give you today is going to run through various bits and pieces, some of our data around child sexual abuse and understanding, and then the resources that we have in response to that. We're not going to go into detailed case studies or examples of child sexual abuse today, but I do want to sort of give you a flag that it's worth just thinking about looking after yourself when we're having these conversations, especially when we're talking about data. Sometimes we can get a bit complacent in our own teams and we think, oh, well, I'm just going to be talking about data. It's not exactly cases, but these numbers can be overwhelming and a bit upsetting as well. And we just need to be aware of how thinking and talking about child sexual abuse can affect us at different times in different ways. So just really important that we're sort of aware of that. If today's not the day for this session, you can come back to it. You can watch the recording another time. If you want to turn your camera off, you can do, although it's delightful to see faces and really helpful when we're presenting. So thank you to those that are sharing your cameras. And just be respectful of each other and absolutely use the chat and ask questions, but just recognise that we're all in different places at different times. We are going to today go through 3 key areas. So we're going to look at what do we know about our understanding of child sexual abuse in Wales, think about the reasons that we may or may not be identifying and responding to concerns of child sexual abuse, and share a selection of the resources that we have at the CSA Centre. And I will be adding bits and pieces in the chat as both Kairika and Nikki are speaking, so please do have a look at those resources as you go along. I will do a pitch for it at the end, but I would highly recommend that you sign up to our newsletter, and I'll put a link for that in the chat. We send that once a month, but it will give you an update on all the bits and pieces that we have coming out and the resources that we'll be sharing, the webinars and the training sessions that we'll be running as well. So that's going to be a great resource for you. But I'll stop there and let Kairika make a start, because Kairika is going to walk us through what we know about the scale and nature of child sexual abuse in Wales.
Thank you, Lisa. I hope you can all see the slides now. I've just started to share them, so I'm seeing Lisa nodding, so that means everything's all right. So thank you again for inviting us. As Lisa said, I am Kairika and I work as a Senior Research and Evaluation Officer at the CSA Centre, with a particular focus on building a better understanding on the scale and nature of child sexual abuse. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I will present sort of core evidence around the scale and nature of child sexual abuse in Wales. As always, I really recommend that you ask questions in the chat if anything is unclear or you would like to understand better some of the numbers. It's quite a fact-heavy section of this presentation, so it's completely expected that you'll have some questions. So I suppose the most important fact about the scale and nature of child sexual abuse is that there are far more children that are sexually abused than our services currently identify. It's a particularly hidden form of abuse, and it's far more common than most people would expect. So based on the best evidence we have, we estimate that at least 25,000 children in Wales would experience some form of sexual abuse every year. And when we compare this number to the children that are identified by different services that are responding to child sexual abuse, we can see that the numbers are far smaller than this figure. So in 2021-22, there were just over 6,000 child sexual abuse offences recorded by the police across Wales, and about 25% of those, so about a quarter, would be non-recent offences, so offences that occurred before 2021-22. There were just 350 convictions for child sexual abuse offences, in Wales in the same year. So we can see that there is a really big drop-off of investigations between it being recorded in police systems and a conviction taking place. So the vast majority of offences do not end in a prosecution of the suspect. And the very tip of the iceberg, there were only 190 children on the child protection register in any local authority in Wales under the category of sexual abuse. Just to add another piece of evidence that I just got hold of, there were about 1,000 children, just over 1,000 children in Wales who attended a sexual assault referral centre. So that would be another element of evidence that's important to understand. But as we can see, the vast majority of children who are sexually abused do not come to the attention of any services at the time that this abuse is taking place. So overall, we estimate that about 1 in 10 children would be sexually abused by the age of 16. And the child sexual abuse is a gendered form of abuse, so girls are much more likely to be sexually abused than boys. So we estimate that 15% of girls and 5% of boys would be sexually abused before the age of 16. We call this a very conservative estimate because it's based on the evidence that we currently have available, and there are sort of quite rapidly developing forms of abuse, particularly taking place in online contexts that aren't being measured very robustly at the moment. So we can say with confidence that this is most likely to be an underestimate of the actual scale. So looking at the Wales data specifically, so this is now survey data that was gathered from a representative sample of Welsh population in 2020. And it asked residents whether they had experienced these forms of childhood abuse before the age of 16. And what we can see here is that sexual abuse was just as likely to be reported as emotional abuse in this survey, and even more likely to be reported as physical abuse. So based on Welsh data, we can say that sexual abuse is just as common, if not more common, than other forms of childhood abuse. But when we compare this data with child protection register data, we can see that sexual abuse is much less likely to be the recorded concern on the child protection register. So including registrations under the multiple category, it's still much lower in volume than physical or emotional abuse. So again, we can see that it's a particularly hidden form of abuse, and it's important to bear in mind that we don't tend to identify children who've been sexually abused. There's also a huge amount of variation in the number of children who are placed on the child protection register under the category of sexual abuse or under multiple category where sexual abuse is one of the concerns. So this is a snapshot data from 2021-22 registrations. And in order to compare different local authorities, what we've done here is to calculate a rate per child population in each local authority. And what we can see here is that there was one local authority, so Pembrokeshire, where there were no children at all placed on the child protection register under the category of sexual abuse. And we can see that in Powys, the rate was nearly 10 children for every 10,000 who were placed on the child protection register. And we can see the average line is, Welsh average is around 3 children per 10,000. It's important to say here as well that this data does change year by year, so it's only a snapshot, and local authorities move on this chart quite a lot, depending on the year. But nevertheless, we do have to understand that these variations are quite significant and lead to a sort of postcode lottery approach to child sexual abuse, which is important to understand. So if, for those of you who work in local authorities, it would be good to sort of look at this data and understand what's happening behind it. So moving on to criminal justice data, here is a chart that looks at police data across England and Wales, and it compares the age distribution of the general population, which is the grey bar chart, with the age distribution of victims of sexual offences as they are recorded in the police data. And what we can see here is that children are at significant additional risk of sexual offence victimisation compared to other age groups.
Just going to pause you, Carrie. Could everybody please mute? We can hear somebody's chat. Thank you.
Excellent. So based on this data, about almost half of female victims of sexual offences were aged under 18 in 2021, and about 2/3 of male victims of sexual offences in police data were under the age of 18. So again, really important to understand this volume, that actually there are lots and lots of children who are recorded by the police. There's a smaller amount of variation in the recording of sexual offences by the police in Wales when we compare it with the local authority data. So there is a more consistent pattern of recording of sexual offences, but there are some variations here too. So again, we use the rate per population in order to compare different police forces. So we can see North Wales has the highest number of offences per population recorded. So it's important to also recognise this is not linked to there being more sexual offences taking place in North Wales. It's just that the police in North Wales has perhaps a better rate of identification of child sexual abuse, because we know that the vast majority of children are not identified when they're being sexually abused. So higher rates generally indicate better identification, not higher levels of abuse. So just a few slides on the nature of abuse. So here we see the, again, based on survey data, the ages of victims when the abuse started. And we can see, so up to the age of 16, it's important to recognise this particular survey didn't ask about sexual abuse of 16 and 17-year-olds. So what we know here is ages from 0 to 15. But based on this data, we can see that about 1/3 of children started to be sexually abused before the age of 9, so well within the primary school age group. Another third said that the abuse started between the ages of 9 and 12, so again almost before the end of primary. And the final third said that it had started between ages 13 and 15. So it's really important to understand it's not just teenagers who are more likely to come to the attention of agencies, but actually abuse can start and does start at younger ages for the majority of children. As I said, we're missing the 16 and 17-year-olds from this picture. And we also are very likely to be missing very young children, so pre-verbal children, where that abuse is really, really difficult to capture and understand even in research, because it's not very likely to be remembered by respondents if it only took place in pre-verbal years. But what we have seen from other sources, so for example, Internet Watch Foundation, which identifies child sexual abuse images circulating online, they have done some analysis of pictures of that very young age group which is quite concerning. So one of the key reasons why child sexual abuse is a particularly hidden form of child abuse is that children generally are very, very unlikely to tell someone that they are being sexually abused at the time that it's taking place. So we can see it across various different research that most children don't tell anyone. So, for example, in the crime survey, of those who said that they had been sexually abused in childhood, 1 in 5 had never told anyone up to the point of their age filling in the survey. So some of them could have been in their 70s or 80s. And when that abuse is by another child, it's even more hidden. So based on an SPCC study from the early 2010s, 5 out of 6 children abused by another child had never told anyone about it. And only 1 in 4, so 25% of respondents to the crime survey had told a professional at any point of their life. So again, it's quite clear that professionals are very unlikely to know about sexual abuse. So who was told at the time that the abuse was taking place? The vast majority of children hadn't told anyone at all. So 82% of boys and 75% of girls didn't tell anyone. And boys were about half as likely as girls to tell across any sort of recipient group. So we can see across this bar chart that the blue chart bar, which is representing boys, is about half the volume of girls. If children do tell someone, it's much more likely to be someone they know personally. So for young age groups, it could be a non-abusing parent or family member. For teenage years, it's more likely to be a friend. But we can see very, very few children telling someone in an official position. So it's really, really important that professionals are not waiting for that verbal disclosure and actually start building a picture without it, because we can see it's just very, very unlikely that children will verbally approach a professional with this information. And Nikki will talk a little bit more about identifying without verbal disclosure. We did a piece of research a couple of years ago in Wales. So we looked at case files in 2 local authorities in Wales, and we talked to social workers in those 2 local authorities about identifying and recording and naming child sexual abuse. And what we found in this research were 4 sort of core areas what made working with child sexual abuse quite difficult for social workers. So a key aspect was the time constraints that reduced staff ability to build relationships with children. And social workers recognize that in order for children to talk about child sexual abuse, they need to have a trusting relationship. So they recognize that the time constraints themselves reduced the likelihood that children will tell them about sexual abuse. And we can say that quite confidently from our own work with practitioners across the multi-agency workforce that these difficulties are present in all the other professions as well. So we also saw very different levels of practitioners' knowledge and skills and confidence in working with cases of child sexual abuse, and general lack of training that is dedicated to child sexual abuse. So most social workers we spoke to in those 2 areas had received only generic safeguarding training rather than dedicated training that looks at child sexual abuse. And again, this is not unusual. I think it's very common across Wales as well as England that there is lack of dedicated training on child sexual abuse. which is quite different from child sexual exploitation as a form of sexual abuse. So most social workers in our focus groups had received child sexual exploitation focused training, but not something that looks at all forms of child sexual abuse, including intrafamilial child sexual abuse. There was a real worry about talking to children about child sexual abuse or exploring the potential that a child could be sexually abused, for fear of asking leading questions and potentially contaminating a police investigation. And that had a real suppressing effect on social workers' confidence to approach child sexual abuse as a topic with children. And again, we've got some resources that Nikki will go through to help build that confidence. And finally, we also noted that there were concerns about recording child sexual abuse concerns, particularly if the child had not verbally disclosed. So there was a worry how that might complicate the work with the family, and what if those suspicions were wrong. But it's really important to understand that without that record of any suspicion of child sexual abuse, there wouldn't be any future evidence if those concerns then appear again later in files that there had been suspicions. So it's really important to have the confidence to record observations, judgments, professional judgments, as well as verbal disclosures when child sexual abuse is a possible concern for that child. So I'm going to hand over now to Nikki to take you through the rest.
Oh, I'm going to jump in briefly on these questions. Thank you so much, Karika. We haven't had any questions in the chat as yet, but feel free, if that's prompted some food for thought, you can add them in and we can pick them up at the end. So I think it's really important. Karika's walked us through the data and shown some sort of real life examples of like why we need to unpick and probe at that data. Data tells us some things about child sexual abuse, but actually the knowledge that you have locally is incredibly important to contextualise that and help us better understand, well, what's that data telling us and what do we need to do in response. What we've got on the screen now is some slides that is some questions that Nikki, Karika and myself have been asking to lots of people across Wales actually over the last 18 months really. So as part of the Wales National Action Plan, we delivered a series of workshops with regional safeguarding boards and exec members of regional safeguarding boards to really sort of push and think about, and they were much longer sessions than this, but to create some space to think about how localities are using data and using that data to understand what their current response to child sexual abuse is, whether that's satisfactory, and where some of the gaps might be in terms of how they can maybe improve that response and practice. And I think it's really important that we get national data and we use that national data, but you have so much more data within your individual services, within your sort of the caseload that you're working with, but also within your sort of local and regional safeguarding boards in terms of what training's being offered, what support's being made available, what's our staffing and retention looking like, what's our information sharing activity looking like. So we prompted some of these questions. We don't have time to sort of have discussion about it today, but I think they're a useful set of questions to maybe take away and have a think about within your teams and think about them within your service, within your locality, and maybe within your region and even nation, to think about how could we use some of these questions. So the first question is really to think about what do you know and understand about the scale and nature of child sexual abuse in your region, locality or service area. So are you looking at that? Have you looked at that data? How has it changed? Karika set out some of that time series data. It's really important to see, well, are we getting better at identifying this? Are we seeing more or less of this? And I think really coming back to that point that we know that far more children are being sexually abused than we're identifying. So if we're seeing that number going down at this stage, that's not telling us that fewer children are being sexually abused. It's telling us that we're identifying less because we are so far from identifying the scale that's happening. So what can that data and how are you using that information to help you say, well, what should we be doing in practice? And does that data reflect what you've heard about today, or is it different? And why is that the case? So then thinking about your services and resources, what is being provided locally in your area? I would say keep a watch on the CSA Centre's website and in the newsletter, because we will be publishing in the next couple of months a detailed report looking at what do we know about services in response to child sexual abuse across England and Wales. But what do you know locally? Does your local or regional response meet the needs of all children? So are you providing support and response for children of different age groups, from different backgrounds and communities, children with disabilities? Are you able to provide responses for all forms of child sexual abuse, or are they just perhaps maybe focused on child sexual exploitation? What do you need to look at in terms of, is your service response meeting the needs of children and families in your locality? And then what training is being provided? So are you equipping and supporting the workforce to do this challenging work and to think about these issues, which maybe they may have had possibly quite limited training on in the past? So what training is available in your region? Have you yourself attended any specific child sexual abuse training? What are your reflections from doing that, and what needs to be provided more in different areas? I think there's something really interesting in Wales. So I in my past did an awful lot of work in Wales, and one of the things I thought was so refreshing in Wales localities was the extent to which there was often very consistent training given across multi-agencies. So that consistency of language, I worked on the Flying Start programme and the Come-Off programme, and there was a lot of real consistency of language across different agencies and different professional groups, and I think that's so valuable. And is that consistency of language and practice happening in the context of child sexual abuse would be a really good question, I think, to ask. So I'm going to hand over, those slides will be shared, and you can use those questions in your localities, maybe use them in a discussion. I'm going to hand over to Nikki now to share some more details on our resources.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just having a little bit of a technical issue here, so bear with me. I tried, I basically lost you all.
We can still see and hear you, Nikki.
Can you? Right, okay,
Yes.
then I actually, Karika, I'm not quite sure. I think, hang on just a moment. Right. I've lost the presentation. Is the presentation still up?
It is.
Right, okay. It hasn't allowed me
But it's
to take
from you.
control.
It's up from you at the minute.
It's got what?
got
It's
your
from
name.
me, is it? Okay, right, okay. So I can see what's happened here. It wouldn't let me take control. So let me just go from current slide, and then we can start off here. Okay. Are we good to go?
Yeah, spot on.
Yes, that's great. Okay, so thank you very much for introducing that. I'm pulling that together, Lisa, really, and thanks, Karika, for, as ever, just explaining really kind of complex data to us in that way. So what we know is there are thousands of children affected in Wales every year who are being sexually abused. It's going unreported, and those children are not telling anybody what is happening. Now, we really wanted this time, this precious time that we had with you, to actually give you a sense that you were taking away something from this presentation, not just knowledge, but something really practical. So what we want to do is to share with you some of the resources that we have worked hard alongside practitioners for the last sort of 2-3 years in pulling together, that will really impact on your confidence, your knowledge and your skills to work with children that you have concerns about. So some of you may have seen these already. Some of you, this may be the first time that you've seen them, but we want to share with you 5 resources today that we think are really at the core of good practice. So the first one is signs and indicators, which we are going to focus on a little bit more than the others today. But we started off with signs signs and indicators. And we know that the sort of professionals have this kind of need to risk assess all the time, but we have tried to really change this and look at it through the eyes of building a picture of concern about child sexual abuse rather than looking through that risk lens, really. So once you have identified a child that you have concerns about, then that automatically and naturally leads to, so how are you going to communicate with that child about sexual abuse? And with the best will in the world, people don't like to talk about sex to anybody, let alone to children. So we have compiled a really comprehensive resource that you can access on our website. I'm sure that Lisa or Karika will put it into the chat now. But our Communicating with Children resource takes you through step by step how you can work with children and how you can have these conversations with children. And then once you have identified that a child has been sexually abused, then we really do need to think about, well, what does the support need to look like for the parents and the carers? Because we know from the evidence that children who make better recoveries, who are able to move on with their lives following sexual abuse as children, are those whose parents and carers are the ones who believe them, validate them, and support them. So we know there's a great body of work that needs to be done by everybody around that child, around supporting parents and carers. So there's another resource that we really would like to highlight to you and for you to take a look at. I'm pulling all of those resources together for those of you working within an education or a kind of a youth service context. We have the safety planning in education resource, which sort of covers a lot of those things, but it's specific because it's tangible and it actually gives you something that you can work with the families, with the child, and with the school in helping you to keep children safe. So that has been a real asset to us as well. The last resource I just want to share with you that has recently sort of come out and is particularly important because of the growing nature of what is happening with online sexual abuse at the moment is, how do we manage risk and trauma after there has been incidents of online sexual offending? So we know that this is a growing problem in our society. Globally, it's a growing problem. So we work closely with the Lucy Faithfull Foundation, and this is an excellent resource which will guide you through how to help a family come to terms with online sexual abuse. So I've kind of flagged that up for you around some key resources that will help you, that you can access today. You can sort of work with your teams, you can have discussions around them in your team meetings. But we also have a sort of a suite of videos that were made specifically to accompany those resources as well. So they're bite-sized, 12 short videos. They're less than 5 minutes each. So you can watch them in one go if you want to, or you can watch them in chapters, or you can just watch them in sort of bite-sized pieces. So how you access them is up to you. They're free. They're on YouTube. You can watch them in work, and they're really engaging. They're very concise and are a really complementary resource to the written work. So we would encourage you to have a look at those as well as looking at the resources. But what we wanted to do today is we wanted just to focus specifically on one of the resources, which is the signs and indicators, because from the data that Karika has presented to us, that's where we know that things are very difficult. Children will not disclose spontaneously or very rarely that they are being sexually abused. Okay, so they do show us, however, so they communicate their unhappiness and they will communicate abuse through their behaviours. And so it is our responsibility as the grown-ups, as the adults, as the professionals, to really be keyed into, what are we looking for? What does it look like when a child is being sexually abused? And this resource is specifically designed to help us build that picture of concern, help us to articulate it. We all know as practitioners, don't we, when we get that gut feeling, something is wrong, something bad is happening here, but we can't articulate it because the child's not giving us the words. So this resource really helps us to do that. Before we actually look at that resource, I just want us to remind ourselves the different contexts where sexual offending actually occurs. Okay, there has been over the last 10 years a massive drive and focus on child sexual exploitation. We all know that. But we also know that most child sexual abuse happens within the family. Okay, and that happens by an adult within the family, but it can also happen by sibling sexual abuse as well, and that is a big component of intrafamilial sexual abuse. We also know through all the work that we have done sort of with institutional sexual abuse, priests, with teachers, youth workers, scout leaders, trusted adults around children who access children through their activities, as well as another context where sexual abuse can happen. Looking sort of at the child sexual exploitation sort of picture, we're all quite familiar with that kind of group of adults, that ring of adults that actually abuse children, but then that crosses over into online sexual abuse as well. As does then you look at sexual harm by another child outside the family. There's a massive crossover there between online sexting, cyber bullying and sexual abuse through the internet. But harmful sexual behaviour presents itself massively within schools. We know that through the Estin reports, and everyone's invited a couple of years ago. And there's also ritual sexual abuse, which is another form of abuse. So sexual abuse happens everywhere, several contexts, and we have to sort of just bear in mind all those different contexts where abuse actually happens. So when we start to think then about what is the impact on a child of sexual abuse? How does it present in children? Very rarely they're going to tell us, so we need to be thinking about what are we looking for? What are we looking for in children? So fear, anxiety, low mood. Now, obviously, there are going to be other forms of abuse, other forms of unhappiness that are going to be creating those specific emotional responses in children. But we need to be clued into this. We need to be aware of their relationships with the people around them. We need to be recognizing, are they generally fearful of other people? Are they shutting themselves away? Are they frightened that if people find out about the abuse, they'll reject them? Is the child in front of you behaving in an anxious manner? Are they being threatened? Are they actually just beginning to display that behaviour of not wanting to go to school, so absent from school a lot, withdrawing from friendships, wanting to be alone, not sleeping well, accompanied then by low mood? Okay, so at the moment, these are kind of generic impacts, and you might see this in a child who's anxious and depressed because there's physical abuse at home or there's domestic violence at home. The sexual abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. Very often, lots of these other things are happening in a child's life as well. So it's about having sexual abuse on your radar as well as other forms of abuse. Difficulty regulating emotions. I work every week in a school, and I see dysregulated behaviour within the school corridors, within classrooms, within the additional learning need department. Confusion with roles and sexual preoccupation, discomfort or confusion about their body. So let's look at some of these a little bit. So struggling to regulate themselves. That's quite a kind of an obvious one, really. And then this is sort of less obvious, and people need to be clued into this, really. So wanting on one hand to be quite grown up, and there's lots of 13, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls who are trying to emulate looking 18, 19, 20, and yet in their ability to do things actually very childlike. And so noticing those sort of contrasting behaviors, and then sexualized behavior. And that's really important for us to sort of to recognize in terms of how we sometimes victim blame. We look at children, and you can sometimes see it in notes or in referrals, that there's a sense of blame around children who behave in a sexualized behavior, which is not congruent with their developmental age. But that is one of the biggest flags that you are going to have, that child is being sexually abused or has been witness to sexual violence or sexual behaviors. So if you've got a child who is beginning to sort of act out this stuff, then, our flags should be absolutely high, and not victim blaming that child for being promiscuous, but saying what's happening in that child's life. Then these sort of emotional responses as well. Grief. Why would a child be grieving? Well, their innocence has been lost. And if they love their parents, if they love their brother, if they love their mother, their grandfather, when that trust has been broken, that is a very common sort of impact and symptom that you'll see in children. Not being able to form relationships, so being less trusting of other children, certainly other adults, or the other way, they may actually become more dependent on adults around them. And I see that a lot in working with children in school, with some of their attachments to some of the teachers who they feel that they can trust. There is sort of a real attachment there. And then you'll get some kids behaving and acting out and showing you that something is wrong through the way that they behave towards other children. So violence, aggression, or bullying behaviors. So none of these specifically on their own are going to say this child has been sexually abused, but these are impacts that we need to be really aware of and mindful of, so that when we start looking at how do we build all those concerns into some kind of coherent, comprehensive narrative, if we do that by sort of looking at a holistic way of building concerns, which is what we've tried to do with our signs and indicators tool. So we look specifically initially at signs and indicators in the children themselves. And the tool then also looks specifically at, are there signs and indicators of sexually abusive behaviour? And it also goes on to look at, what are the vulnerabilities in that family environment? Is there domestic violence at home? Is there substance misuse at home? Is there coercive behaviour going on at home? What is happening in that home environment that actually makes that child vulnerable to sexual abuse? So we start to build that picture of concern. I'm just going to try and play this video for you. It's a tiny video which introduces our resource to you. Hopefully the volume will be fine, because I did put it on. Let me know.
Our signs and indicators template is designed to support a common language among professionals to identify, discuss, record. To intervene to protect children who may be being sexually abused, we need to build a picture of concerns. Not just the signs and indicators a child may be showing, but also the potential indicators of sexually abusive behaviour in those who may be abusing them. Additionally, some factors within the child's family or environment may increase opportunities for abuse to occur, and therefore also need to be considered. As professionals, it is our job to be alert to wider signs and indicators that something isn't right for a child, and explore all possibilities of what might be happening to them. We know there are many challenges to uncovering child sexual abuse. It simply isn't likely that a child will be able to tell us directly what's happening. The responsibility is on us. Gather signs and indicators of possible abuse, build a picture of our concerns and the child's experience, and work out what to do about them. In our signs and indicators of child sexual abuse template, you can record and make notes of the signs and indicators of concern. As you work through each section, you'll quickly be able to build a picture of your concerns all in one document. Remember, a child who's been sexually abused may show no signs at all that they're being abused, or they may show many. Of course, the signs they do show could also be indicative of something else that's happened in their lives. Please remember, child sexual abuse can feel difficult and complex, but by all working together, we can tackle this. Do download the template and see how it will help your role.
Okay, I'm not sure if you could hear that. It was very, very quiet at my end, and I really apologise about that. Lisa's put a link into the chat now that you can view that, but it gave you sort of a flavour. She flicked through the tools, so it's a really useful tool for you to help process your thinking. And when you look at it, it'll take you through these 4 different areas of the behaviour of the child and the young person specifically. Then it'll look at some physical signs as well, which it'll help focus your thinking on that. It'll take you to the environmental signs as well. It'll take you to the family. We were talking about what are the vulnerabilities within the family. And some of the vulnerabilities make them far more at risk of sexual harm. It also makes you take a step back and look at the behaviour of those who are living around the child, really. So we need to look at what are the signs and indicators of abusive behaviour, including grooming behaviour in the people around the child as well. So, and it allows you to record that as a living document that you keep on adding to, that you can keep on the go if you have concerns, until you're confident that you have enough information to then maybe make a referral at that point. So I'm aware of time. What is really important as practitioners, we're working with children, is that we must avoid the assumptions that we sometimes bring with us into relationships and situations with children. And I'm just going to explain what I mean now by that, by next slide, which, there you go. Let me go back. So these are sort of the examples for us just to recognise how we can sometimes get waylaid and distracted by some of the issues, such as gender, for example. So if a child is expressing angry, aggressive or violent behaviour, or if they're masturbating or sexually self-soothing excessively, if they're using pornography a lot, teenagers having sex with lots of people, we should be thinking that these are some of the indicators of children who are being sexually abused, as opposed to putting them or shoehorning them basically into naughty children. They are their behaviour is unacceptable, exclusions from school, getting them sort of expelled, pupil referral units, going down those sorts of routes of behavioural management without asking a question around child sexual abuse is not helpful at all. Equally, when we're working with children who with disability, both learning disability and physical disability, we know that the evidence is that this group of children are disproportionately more likely to be sexually abused than other children. So we need to be much more aware of bruising on their bodies. Are they wetting or soiling more that is unrelated to their toilet training? Is there aggression going on? So constantly thinking, is there is there an explanation there outside of the ones that we're just putting it down to their disability? The same with ethnicity. I worked for a long time with Czech Roma girls in Cardiff, and it was the norm. The language around that was they're a highly sexualized group of young women and young girls, and you know, if they were highly provocative in their dress, you know, that we weren't routinely asking them about what was happening at home around their sexual experiences and what was happening in terms of abuse. So, you know, we've got to be really careful and mindful that we just don't sort of shoehorn people. The same with teenagers having sex with lots of people. When we look at sexuality, you know, we sort of we can be quite judgmental about young people and the language that we use around teenagers. You know, if teenagers are having sex with lots of people, there's going to be a reason for that. And we need to be going beyond the behavior and actually talking to young people and helping them to tell us what is happening in their lives. And all of these things can completely intersect with one another. And sometimes we can miss what is staring us in the face because we're too busy looking at all these behaviors and not looking at the underlying reason of what is actually going on. So our resource, before I hand back to Lisa to pull it all together, really it is about us as a collective, as a community of practice, developing a common language so that we can actually discuss, record, share concerns, so that when it comes to having our sort of strategy discussions, we've got that information there with us. So it's not a diagnostic tool. It's not a replacement for Seraph. It's none of those things. It is literally something that helps you to make a structured professional judgment about what you are seeing in a child's behavior. And finally, from me, using the template, it's a living document. It's dynamic. It can grow, and you can use it with as a prompt to talk to different professionals, when to talk to children and their parents. It helps you to make clear notes about what your concerns are and the context of your observations. And more importantly, it helps you bring that together so that you can make a clear plan of what needs to happen next. So that's enough from me on that. Thank you very much for listening. I'm just going to hand over to Lisa just to pull this together. Would you like me to do the slides for you, Lisa?
That would be delightful. Thank you very much.
Thanks
so much, Nikki. Can you mute yourself as well, Nikki? I think I'm getting the reverb.
Okay.
Which makes me sound like I think I'm Madonna. Yeah.
I will. I don't know how to do it. Yes, hang on, here it is. No.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Right. Okay. So I'm going to rattle it through because I know we're already at time, and I appreciate those of you that have been able to stay to this point. So I've just put in the chat a link to our training pages. We have a whole range of training covering many different aspects for many different groups of professionals, as well as multi-agency training. You can book them as a team. We often run sessions that you can book on as an individual. We have also got some webinars up on our listings at the moment as well that you can dial into. But really importantly, we've also got a free e-learning course on intrafamilial child sexual abuse. So that's an introductory course. It takes about 90 minutes to do, and you can do it in 3 modules. It's great. Very much encourage you to have a look at that free e-learning course and share it with your teams. If we move on to the next page, we also have a series that I really want to highlight. I've already put one of them in the chat actually on disclosures, but we have a series of which there are 2 new updates from this month called our Key Messages from Research series. They are super tight, succinct summaries of the research and evidence base around different aspects of child sexual abuse. So some of the topics are listed there. I'm not going to read them out, but they are great. We get brilliant feedback from people that are maybe doing studies that want to be able to reference things in their own research and their own papers, but also from team managers who might use these as a discussion. They're really short, so you're not sending your team off to go and read really long papers before they come to a meeting. They're really short summaries that you can read over a cup of tea and then have a discussion about. So it really prompts really great discussion. We've also heard about them being used in supervision sessions. There are 2 new ones that have just come out this week to coincide with the online safety bill becoming its act. So we have the child sexual abuse by adults in online contexts and harmful sexual behaviour in online contexts. So they're 2 new ones that have just gone out there, and we've recently updated a number of these publications as well. So strongly recommend having a look at those. I have already got you to all sign up to the newsletter, so I don't need to cover that, hopefully. We have been trying to respond to various questions in the chat. I'm conscious that you will all need to go, but if there are any questions, I'm very happy to stay on for another 5 to 10 minutes.
So just to say thank you all for your presentation, and I just want to echo all the comments that have been posted in the chat to say that it was a really interesting session. So thank you all for coming to present to us today. We will make everything available online, and we'll also share any of the resources that have been mentioned with the group. And yeah, thank you for the another time. So yeah, thank you again, and see you all soon for our next session. Take care.
Great. Thank you. Like I said, happy to